Cool. All right, so we're live, ish. So, hi. This is introduction to Drupal theming. We're going to talk about how do you crack the nut that is the theme layer in Drupal 7. We're going to kind of go step by step. Hopefully, kind of pick up what's going on with it. And I typically like my presentations to be very like back and forth Q&A kind of thing. Even if it's just straight up heckling, that's fine too. I can dig it. So my name's Brandon Morrison. I'm a Drupal developer / themer / whatever I happen to need to be at any particular time. I work for Phase 2 Technology. We're a company based out of Washington, D.C. We've got people kind of all over the country. We do a lot of work with publishing groups and government websites. If you want to happen to hear about one of our projects, I'm doing one last presentation with my coworker who's sitting in the back at, what time is that, 4? Sometime later, we're doing a kind of a discussion on the Department of Energy website, so energy.gov. If you want to kind of hear about all that, or if you just enjoy listening to one of us talk, then that's cool too. Phase 2, we're a very heavy Drupal shop. We maintain as a company, or the people in the company as a whole maintain probably like 3 dozen or so modules. We've contributed to lots of the bigger name modules, and we also do a fair number of distributions. We're responsible for Open Atrium, which is kind of an intranet system, Open Public and Open Publish, which are kind of geared towards publishing clients and government stuff. They're both interesting to kind of take apart and dissect and see what's going on. And they're also good starting distributions too. So that's what we do, and you probably don't care about that because you want to hear about theming. So we'll talk about that. So did anyone get a chance to download the demo theme that I provided on GitHub? Awesome. Cool. All right. So, all right. I'll have the link. The link is in the page on the camp. You don't have to have it to follow along because I'll be showing code, code samples and that sort of thing. Let me get rid of my prior stuff. Let me open this up real quick. I thought I was all prepared and everything, and obviously I was not. So, who here is familiar with Twitter Bootstrap? Okay, so Twitter Bootstrap is it's basically like if you're building websites by hand, it's a framework. It's a CSS and JavaScript. Framework's kind of a heavy word to use, but basically it's code that kind of gets you started and kind of suggests common good practices for putting things together. I had a friend describe Twitter Bootstrap as like the universal design of the internet because it's very Swiss looking if you're into graphic design kind of stuff. Like it's very plain, it's very modular, very grid based and everything, and so it works really well because it's very universal and it's horribly inoffensive to look at. So we're gonna kind of do the step by step for actually creating a theme with Twitter Bootstrap. And in all that talking, I still didn't open the files that I needed to open. Okay, so I'm going to preface all this too in that I'm going to do some Git magic to swap files in and out. If you're not familiar with Git and you see me typing something in the command line, just assume that I'm copying and pasting files into the folder because it's like if you don't want to mess with Git, that's kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about. So, all right, so we're gonna start with the basics of Drupal. So you can create a Drupal theme in one file with 2 lines. It is all you really have to do to register a theme in Drupal is to create what's called a .info file. And all the .info file is it tells Drupal, hey, I am a plugin of some notice. Now that's either a theme or a module in what you would normally discuss with that. In our case, it's going to be a theme. So. So we can open that up here, and we see that I have a. Let me blow the text up a little bit. Excuse me. So we have a new theme. It's called Step by Step, and the second line is saying that this is available for Drupal 7. And so if I go to my demo site, so if I show the appearance, I've already turned on my step-by-step theme. And I've created some dummy content for this that will kind of clean up and add things as things go on. And you'll notice that by default, without telling Drupal anything about how you actually want things to look, it's actually created some markup. You can see nodes, you can see images and that kind of thing. The question you should ask when you see something like that is, where does that come from? Because obviously, my theme hasn't told Drupal, I want this to look like anything at all. It's just doing it because that's what Drupal does. That's kind of an ongoing thing with Drupal in general. It does things, and you kind of have to work around it sometimes. So if you don't take anything else home, learn that you have to work around Drupal sometimes. So the question, again, is where does that default markup come from? So whenever you download modules or anything like that, actually, let me take a step back. So everybody knows what a module is, right? We're labeled as a beginner, so I want to make sure that I'm not going over anybody. Yeah, so Drupal is broken up. Drupal core is broken up into a subset of modules, and modules can provide default markup for whatever they're displaying. So if you're looking at the default markup that comes along with Drupal, there's a few that you probably need to pay attention to. Specifically, so HTML. So all of our template files are labeled as .tpl.php. And you can go and look for those in various system folders. So, for example, html.tpl.php is so this is my site root, theming demo. I'm going to go to modules, system, and so the system module itself provides a few base templates. So, like, I'm going to go ahead and open up HTML and page and region just for kicks. And this is the core markup that's provided. You'll see, what's region? Let's start with HTML. So HTML is the overall wrapping template file. So that that determines what am I doing HTML5? Am I doing XHTML? Am I doing those kinds of things. It's also where you can provide like all the styles and scripts and that sort of thing that are getting added to the page. It's the overall wrapper for everything. And then there's the actual page.tpl, which is the content of that. So think of it as like a Russian nesting doll. You keep going in, and there's another layer to it. On just about every page display, there's a page.tpl, and that will define things like the header, the body content, any sidebars. As a Drupal themer, you can tell your theme that you want custom regions and that sort of thing, and we'll talk a little bit about how you do that later. Excuse me. And yeah, so I mean, if you look at the markup for this, it's probably a little cryptic if you're not familiar with PHP, because we have things like this, which isn't too bad. It's you know, if you're not a developer, you see that and you're probably saying, okay, I need to print something that's logo. So that's pretty straightforward. There's some other things that get a little tricky, like print theme links system secondary menu. Like what's that? So yeah, and we'll talk about what all these things do and kind of how you can kind of access that a little bit more. So system provides a few base template files. The node module provides its own for node displays. So you can kind of cycle through with that. So if we open that up. Node.tpl.php. So this is the display for an individual node. And so there's various variables that go along with that, and that's all kind of written about. Like all the core modules provide really good documentation on the TPL files, so it's pretty easy to kind of pick up and say, okay, this is what this is, and so on and so forth. It may take a little digging, but that's how it goes. Now, contrib modules can also potentially provide TPL files. I can't, so like views, for example, if you ever have to actually do custom theming for views, you might want to try to find a different way to do it because it's kind of complex. But just off the top of my head, it provides like a whole list of displays for actually doing that. And there's some good modules out there for, if you don't actually want to get into the TPL files for messing with that. But I mean, it's pretty straightforward as far as like, this is where the default markup for Drupal comes from. Now, that being said, if you have a custom theme, you're probably going to want to modify that at some point because, not every site needs to look exactly the same. Not every site is going to be serviced by the same, markup needs. So what we can do is in our theme, we can override those template files. So if you're building a theme from scratch, typically what I would do is take whatever core or whatever the base template file that I need to overwrite, and you'll copy that file into your theme folder, and then you'll do your modifications from there. So, as an example, all right. So all I've done here is add a few template files to my example theme. I'm just clearing the cache just to make sure that Drupal sees those new files. I don't know if that's actually required or not, but I've kind of gotten into the habit of anytime I change a file, I just clear the cache just because that's usually the first thing that breaks. So again, all I've done is replace the default markup, and already you can kind of see a few things have changed. I have this new header area up here, and I'll show you where that got added. So like I have a custom html.tpl.php file. So like I said earlier, we're basically implementing Twitter Bootstrap as a custom theme. Drupal core by default, the doc type is XHTML something or other. Like it's a pretty long string, whereas Twitter Bootstrap is straight HTML5, which is just that. So we're implementing that. In my page.tpl.php, I'm adding some of the default components to Twitter Bootstrap. So, I mean, this is kind of what it will look like when it's finished as far as things. So, there's the navigation that shows up on the top. So, I've implemented that in my theme. So that's the markup for it. I'm adding my custom elements via this function, which came straight from the previous the previous template file. So you don't have to know, as long as you have a rough idea of what the function is doing. You don't have to know like all the internals of what's going on. So all this print theme link system main menu is just it's printing an itemized list of menu links. And I've added a few other things as well. But I mean, the main thing to get from that is that I've changed the default markup, and the only thing that I really had to do was add some template files into the theme folder. So it's not that bad stepping into that part. Something to kind of talk about is the theme function itself. So when you're dealing with Drupal, like let's say you have a module that provides a piece of content, and it's I'm trying to think of a good quick example. So let's say you have a module that displays comments. It's like it's your custom comments setup. Actually, the road I'm going to go down with that is bad. It's a bad example, so never mind. I was going to say to re-implement the comments in the theme layer, and that's just a bad performance idea, so don't do that. Let's say you're doing like a custom user image on every page. Oftentimes you'll see on articles and stuff, you'll have like an author bio and that sort of thing. And let's say you need to add a library that when you click on the image, it pops up and does like a custom thumbnail pop-up kind of thing. Oftentimes to interact with those libraries, you have to modify your markup. But if the markup is being provided from Drupal, sometimes it comes in a TPL.php file, and so it's pretty easy to overwrite it like that. Other times there's data that comes in that isn't set up like that. So Drupal has a concept called a theme function, which basically what will happen. Let me show you an actual code example. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and jump to... Actually, that's too far steps ahead. Just know that theme functions allow you to override functional code that was written somewhere else. And I'll show an example of that in a couple of steps later, because I did the order horribly wrong there. So I mean, modifying the markup there is pretty easy. So we're going to go on to step 3. Adding custom JavaScript and CSS. That's pretty easy to do as well. All right, so you'll notice now that I have a few new files. I've added in a CSS folder all the Bootstrap CSS, which comes just straight from Bootstrap, and then I've added some custom CSS specifically for this theme. And I also have a JavaScript file that I've pulled to do. Basically, I was having a rendering issue with the admin toolbar and the toolbar that comes with Twitter Bootstrap. So like one was displaying on top of the other, and so I ended up overwriting a theme function. So I'll kind of talk about that in a sec. And then the other thing that has changed is my .info file. So if you'll recall, earlier it was just these 2 lines. Now I've added 3 style sheet files and my JavaScript. One sec. So what's happened with the style sheet files is that I'm saying on every page load for this theme, I want you to add this particular CSS file. and then I've done that for all three. And by doing that, it's tied into the whole Drupal ecosystem. I don't know if you guys are familiar with some of the performance things that you can do, like you can compile all your CSS down to a single file on the fly. This enables that, and the same thing with the scripts and that sort of thing. The format for this, so if you're familiar with, if you're doing HTML by hand, you can target a style sheet for either like for print purposes or for screen purposes or anything like that. That's what this value is for. So basically, I'm saying, it doesn't matter if I'm printing the page or whatever. I want the style sheet to show up. So if I clear my cache and reset, all of my new styles have shown up. And so it's looking a lot more like Twitter Bootstrap now versus, not. But even though it's, even though I've got the new CSS files and stuff, you'll notice that I have a few weird things. Like, for example, this is the search bar, and the search button is down here. And that's not how that's supposed to render. And down here, the pager is like these really spread out buttons that don't really line up. That's also not how that's supposed to render. And the reason for that is that, again, the markup is not matching the style sheet that I need for Twitter Bootstrap. And this goes back to the theme thing that I was talking about a few minutes ago. Though that markup is not provided by a TPL file, it's provided through a function. And the way that I know that is, well, for starters, I know that because I spent a lot of time digging. But so there's not a super easy answer for that, unfortunately. Usually, what I'll do, api.drupal.org will provide a listing of various function calls and files that happened throughout Drupal, and it's our documentation for the entire thing, so theming, module writing, that sort of thing. And in this particular instance, so for example, let's take a look at the search issue that we were dealing with earlier. If I open up the core module that says, so that's the core search module, you'll notice that there's a few TPL files that are provided with that. I know that I have a form that's broken, so it's the actual block form. So I'll open that up, and I'll be like, oh, okay, well that block is obviously broken. And you'll notice that I've overwritten that already over here. So there was some changes that needed to happen there. But you'll notice over here that the actual form itself is just a variable. So I have no way of actually interacting with that as it currently stands. If I'm just talking about a TPL file, so I'm like, oh, okay, well that's a problem, because if I can't modify that, then my markup's still screwed. So what I'll do is, and again, this is a lot of digging that, if you're not familiar with the guts of Drupal, it's kind of daunting, and is a very valid criticism of getting kind of breaking into Drupal theming. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on with things sometimes. Let's see. So if I'm looking for, so what I'm looking for is the, because I know it's a variable and I know it's a form. I'm aware. Does everybody know what the form API is? Okay, so one thing that Drupal does that's a common pattern is what's called a render arrays. And so what a render array will look like is, let me pull up where I actually know where one is. Sorry about that. Actually, that's probably under page. You know, forget all that. We're just going to go to the API docs because it's a little bit more accessible. So I'm going to look at the Forms API reference for that. So if you're familiar with what an array is, it's basically just nested variables that kind of stack inside of each other. And the way that Drupal actually renders all of its information is through render arrays, and the Form API has a very similar syntax. It's processed through the same functionality. And so what you'll do, like anytime you're dealing with a form in Drupal, you're dealing with an array that basically says, I have a text field, it has this title, things like that, versus actually handling the raw markup. And where that's valuable is that instead of having to parse, markup, like it's not so bad if you just want to override it and do your own thing, but if you want to modify it, like if you want to say, I want this class to say search box instead of just search, for example, that's a real pain because the most efficient way to do that is through regular expressions, and you don't want to do that if you're not really into that. It's just a real pain to debug and everything. So so with the Form API and just render arrays in general, what it provides us is flexibility. It allows us to say, you know what, I don't want to display this entire section of the page, or I want to add 4 classes to this particular form item. And that's how I end up fixing the search box in step 4. So let me show you how I fix that. And we do that through what's called the template.php file. So whenever you're creating a theme in general with Drupal, you have your CSS files, you have your template files and that sort of thing, but sometimes you actually need to write a little bit of code to get the markup to display however you need it to do. This is where if you're not a developer, it pays to know a developer who can help you with that sort of thing. And what the template.php file does is it allows a theme to interact with Drupal on a more code level versus the template files. So if I go to So again, I'm clearing my cache. We go to my files, and we notice that we have a new file that's just at the root of the theme called template.php. And I have this. Actually, I probably fix search in the next step after this. What I do fix in this step, though, is the pager. So this is an example of a theme override. So the original module itself for the pager, and I think that's the system module, but we'll find out in a second. So what Drupal provides is a module called Theme Pager, and Theme Pager returns a render array that describes the pager, and the pager in this instance is this guy right here. So it's what we use to step through multiple pages of content in Drupal. Because the code to generate that would be overly complicated to put in a TPL file, and DrupalCorn has decided instead to do it through a function. So instead of providing just raw text output with some code in it, we have, let's see, where was that? We have this function that, if you're not a coder, is probably kind of daunting to look at because there's just a lot of going on. So there's lots of calculations as far as how many pages do I have? Am I going to have? How many? How many should I display? Should I only show the first 5? What page am I on now? That sort of thing. So there's a lot going on with it. And what I ended up needing to do, honestly, is just change a few class names to get it displayed. Like I don't need to change the logic at all. Like nothing's happening. So so what ends up happening in this is instead of, for example, you notice that you have places right here. So when you're talking about a render array, you can define things like class. So that will be the class that's applied to the surrounding div of whatever is being rendered. So you can add those sorts of things, and so basically I'm adding classes and changing the classes that are being displayed by default to match up more with the Bootstrap CSS. I'll leave better notes in the GitHub for this when you guys go back and look at it, because it's kind of hard to just kind of point and say this happened and it's cool and it worked, because that's kind of what happened. But yeah, I'll describe that a little bit more in the notes for that. So yeah, so I mean so I guess taking a step back, what a theme override is, how you actually do that in Drupal in your .tpl or in your template.php file, is the original function is called theme underscore whatever your function is, and then the way to override it is you replace theme with your function name. So my function, or my theme name rather. So my theme is called step by step. So I call this step by step underscore pager. And Drupal is smart enough to know that if I'm trying to render this, I need to make sure that the theme that I'm using doesn't have an override for whatever we do by default. So again, it's the Russian nesting doll kind of thing. It's if in my theme I'm telling it to display a certain way, follow that first. If not, then just do whatever we do by default. Does that make sense? Cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and skip to step 5. And that's where I have some preprocess functions. So what a preprocess function is so we have our pure theme functions, like the pager that I described. We have our tpl.php files, which are like the page and node and that sort of thing for relatively static content that doesn't have a lot of business logic to actually render it. But you'll notice with those TPL files, you have all these variables that are coming into the system. A good question to ask at this point would be, well, where do those variables come from? Because they, like everything else, they shouldn't just come out of nowhere. What's happening is Drupal does what's called preprocess functions, and what a preprocess function is that it generates all of the variables that get passed to tpl.php files. So if you need to update how certain things are displayed, if you need to kind of rearrange how content is used, something that I used to do a lot on projects is so when you do a node display, the title is always bundled with the node content itself on certain pages. Well, you can pull the title out and display it on a different section of the page, or I can say, if your user is this, has this particular role, I don't want to show you anything from this field, or I want to display it in a different way. It would make more sense. So you can do things like that. Let's see. So I checked out step 5, and the main thing that changed here is I added a form alter. I guess that's all I added, and that's okay. So the form alter is for the search box, but Let me show you an example of an actual preprocess function. I thought I had one in here, but I guess I didn't. So. All right, so this is so what we're looking at is 7 preprocess page. So 7 is the theme name. That's the core admin theme. And then preprocess, and then this is for page. So this is injecting variables into the page.tpl.php file for the 7 theme. Does that make sense? Cool. And so all we're doing. So with that particular function, you get passed in, all preprocess functions get passed in a variable, one variable that's an array. Typically you call it vars, just short for variables. And then for each array item, you tell it, what that's supposed to stand for. So how that gets translated to the TPL file is you'll have a variable that's $primary local tasks, and then you can render that in your in the actual TPL file itself. So you would do that through a function called Drupal render, Drupal render, and then you pass in that array. You can also do like strings, so you can just print a string if you want to do that too. So yeah, I know I'm covering a lot, so if there's any questions or comments or anything. No? Okay.
Well, okay.
Sure.
This must be a big session, and I feel totally overwhelmed that this is what I have to face to.
So,
I'm not going to do it.
right. I guess how I've kind of structured this is I've gone from like the least complicated thing you can do to like the most complicated thing you can do. And for like 90% of the things that you'll adjust, you won't have to touch the most complicated stuff. Part of what made in this particular display made it kind of difficult is that I'm using a CSS that I'm intentionally not changing to fit the markup. And if you're better with CSS than you are with, say, hacking away at the markup in Drupal, which I suspect most people would be if you're not familiar with Drupal, it's probably 100 times easier just to say, you know what, instead of this class, I'm just going to change it to this class to match the markup that's being used and just make it work. So again, I'm just trying to give an idea, an overall view of like what's possible, what can you do, and what kinds of rabbit holes you can get sucked into going down when trying to create a custom thing. And this is all again prefaced with the fact that these are this is just a straight custom theme versus using base themes, which kind of do a lot of the legwork for you. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So I guess I say all that to say, yes, it's really daunting to do some of the crazy stuff that you can do with a theme layer, but you probably don't have to, nor do you probably want to in most cases. So I hope that makes it a little bit easier to approach. But sure. Mm-hmm. It can be, yes. No, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, so again, like, I'm not touching any of the CSS that I'm using. Like, I'm using, like, I wrote, like, a very small amount of CSS to match a few things just to make it to work with Drupal in a non-terrible fashion. But otherwise, I'm not touching that. And like any good problem, you can solve a problem in multiple ways. So, if it's easier to adjust your CSS to fit the markup that's being displayed by Drupal by default, then by all means, that's a great way to solve it. So, I mean, yeah, you can definitely do custom themes just, CSS only, and you don't even have to touch 90% of what I showed. So if you did like a custom CSS theme, for example, using just the core markup, all you would have is the .info file, which would point to your CSS files, and then you can do whatever you want in the CSS. So it doesn't have to be as complicated as these things, but again, I'm just trying to give like an idea of these are all the crazy, crazy things that you can do if you really want. And hopefully, just by having the exposure, you can at least know, okay, well, if I need to adjust this, I can do that. So.
I would also point out that when you're first starting off, being confused is completely normal.
That too.
And I mean that in the most sincere way, right? So one of the things that the community project has tried to strive for, outside of documentation, camps, cons, videos, books, all these different things, it's still very confusing. When I first looked at Drupal, I have a technical background, I was like, this makes no sense. So in addition to following these videos and going to camps, I honestly say to be completely okay with being confused at the beginning. The key to remember is because there are multiple ways to do something, go down the track that makes most sense to you, right? And then when you get to a certain point that you can't figure out how to do what you need to do, then you can go back and use the tools that he's saying, whether it's starting with the custom theme, going to the API website, picking up a book. What you'll find is the flexibility that Drupal has opens up a world to do really amazing things, but because it is so flexible, if you're coming at it with, well, I just want to do this one thing, you're looking at this giant tool things like, well, I don't know where you can start. So, I'm just saying that's fine. That's the double-edged sword to what it is. If you just keep sticking with it, looking at the videos, looking at the code, picking up a book. Even the magazines that they're giving away, there's an article that does exactly what he's saying by Amy Jane Hockman in the Drupal
The Watchdog.
magazine. The article is called How to Create a Theme. It's going, so you can supplement that with this. So, yeah, this part is daunting, and this is probably also people who maybe a little bit a couple of steps ahead of you, but just keep pushing, and you'll get the aha moment. Yeah, you will.
Agreed.
The easiest way to create your own theme is to take the existing one,
Mm-hmm.
copy that, and then start to adjust the CSS.
Yes. Yeah,
And then adjust maybe some layout things in the file.
exactly. And it's the kind of thing that, for most projects that I've dealt with, there's always, you get through 90-95% of the project, and it's all fine, it's pretty easy, but then there's the one nagging thing that you kind of have to tweak on. And so it's okay, well, now that I've got everything else done, how do I fix this one thing that, has to get fixed, because obviously that, it's just how it is. So, that's, and like Frederick was saying, Drupal gives you a lot of ways to skin a cat, and it's just, how do you get to that? And, no, you didn't say that, but I said that, but it's...
So how do you make a sub-theme?
I'm glad you asked that, because that's a great transition for me. Thank you.
Why would you want to?
So the reason you would do a sub-theme, let me tell you how to do it, and then I'll tell you why you want to do it. Full theme. Let's move on. So basically, to sub-theme in your .info file, you need to point to a base theme. And so what that would look like is just somewhere in your .info file you add that, and so that means that Drupal will look for Garland, the theme Garland, and pull any information from there before it looks for Drupal core stuff. So let's say you have a template file that you override here. It just loads that. But if you're missing it here, but Garland has it, then it'll pull it from there. And if it's missing in Garland, then it'll pull it from whatever Drupal does by default. The reason you want to do that is so there are lots of really good base themes out there. There's Zen and Omega and a few other things like that. And they do really good jobs with kind of setting up good defaults for different workflows and that sort of thing. And it's the kind of thing where, like anything else in Drupal, you can either rely on other people to do things for you as like the whole community thing, and then you focus on the things that are going to be specific to your project, or you can take on more of that on your own through a theme. So like if you're starting from scratch, and you say you want like a responsive design in your theme, then you have to build that on your own, which is fine if you want to do that. But if that's something that you want to offload onto a base theme, there are plenty of good base themes that do responsive design. So then you can just focus on, well, I need this dressing on it, I need this particular imaging, that sort of thing. Is that cool?
So there's another reason too that upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
So when Drupal has a new upgrade come out, not a major jump, but also themes have to get big.
Right.
If you've gone in and modified the theme, and all of a sudden you've got to download the new one and modify the new one before you can use it, or if you do a sub-theme, that comes out in the new version that fits with the new version of Drupal. And your little sub-theme is the only thing you have to focus on.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, just general project management, the less that you have to do on your own, the less responsibility you have to keep things up to date and that sort of thing. So,
Let's have a plot and two.
okay.
Showing I have a number of sites based on Omega and Fusion.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do some, so you can talk about whatever, but we can talk about how, what I'm looking for.
Okay.
I would contribute to that one too. I was thinking the same thing, but around, there are GUI tools available for theme building now. I've fallen in love with Artisteer. You can knock out themes, and you can actually template Artisteer as well. So if
Cool.
you want to override its defaults.
I'm actually not familiar with that one. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Cool. So I think I've run out of time, but. Yeah.
Just curious, before you started with Drupal, what was your background before you were designer?
I was actually a journalist, so completely different. My major is in media design, which is kind of halfway between graphic design and journalism. Part of it is that I've been primarily a developer for the last few years, so that probably taints my view a little bit from like, oh yeah, this is easy, writing 12 algorithms, no problem, right? And yeah. So sorry about that. But it's just a text file, so you add.
Well, I know, but I mean, you got the base theme is Garland, so what would you, how would you do with something?
So you don't define sub-themes, you define base themes. So step by step, if I save this, is now a sub-theme of Garland.
The one you're working on is the sub-theme.
Yeah. So it's not that you're saying, I want this other theme to be a sub-theme of this. You're saying this.
Step by step.
Yeah.
It's a sub-theme of Garland.
Exactly.
He's working on step by step.
Yeah, so this is all you would have to do is just add that. No, that's exactly it. I mean, it would pull in all of its info from Garland except things that you've overwritten in step by step.
So how would you call it?
That's all you do.
Just add that one line.
And then you say, I want step by step.
It shows up as a new theme, I think is what he's saying. You'll have a new theme called step by step.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah, but can I use it within my website?
yeah, yeah. So like I'll save it.
Say, oh, look, there's step by step. It's in the right folder.
So like I've saved the file. Yeah, so I've saved the file. I'm going to clear the Drupal cache, and then we're going to watch it horribly break the theme because I pulled from Garland. Oh, wow. That didn't... Yeah. Exactly. Cool. Well, thanks for... well.
What other choices besides all are there? Let's say they're like mobile or responsive.
Yeah, so it's the same targets you can set with just a regular style sheet. So it's a print and screen, and there's a few others. You can Google it. Yeah. So, cool. Well, thanks for your time, everybody. Enjoy your lunch.